A lot of the time I have to harp on purely technical things like matte lines, but there are cases as you become more advanced and as we move through this course where your decisions are actually going to have a lot more to do with storytelling. Now, that's a grandiose term, isn't it? But here, these elements have a story, and I really like what I'm seeing here. So this story was told by adding a rust element and using it as a luma inverted matte, which means you could adjust the amount of rust that you want just with a simple levels effect. And I adjust this downward. And that's going to adjust that rust element to determine how degraded that is. Cool. What this tells me over here is that's an old place, like one of the oldest places. I think the founding fathers played baseball at this place. So this is suitably old. I might even make it a little more faded if it's going to be that degraded, but that's nitpicky. I think this is cool. So the story I'm being told here is reinforcing that as spiffy as this place looks, it also goes way back, as does the brand AEVFX. Then over here on the field, well, I know that element and I know it's squished down, but let's say that that's not an issue for you. Okay, what is this? Is it a shadow? Is it meant to be grass spray painted black? I think maybe the idea, well, I'm not really sure what the idea was. It's very clean and crisp, so it's not even as soft as the other edges down here, but if it were a cast shadow, obviously it would have to be a lot softer. The placement seems a little odd, so I would leave that one out or figure out how to integrate it so it either feels more like something that would have been painted on the field or maybe a pattern in the grass, kind of like what you see with the mowing pattern, and that's my nitpick. Here is a shot that caused a lot of difficulty for people trying to make the elements stick. And when we loop this, you can see this is not quite perfect, but on a single shot, it looks really good. And what I like here is that the student made use of sphere eyes to match the bulging. I don't know how the student came up with this, but if you just corner pin it, and then the transform tool was used to move it around underneath the corner pin, so that's fine. It's sliding around quite a bit. And so the student recognized that the problem was putting a track that would probably work on a flat surface up against a scene that clearly has maybe even some lens distortion, but also just surface distortion. And so I believe this was probably an experiment with the sphere eyes tool to get things matching. So although the execution is slipping and sliding slightly, I really wanted to call this one out as just being really nice effort. And using a luma inverted matte on the plate itself, which is this layer above, means it's being held out according to the luminance of the underlying element. And as we've already seen, you could go ahead and go into that and adjust levels as the student has done here. Awesome. This student somehow didn't realize that we had provided graphic elements for the scene, which is okay, but it's a good reminder to, take a look around before you dive in. And this shot is obviously not completed, but it gives me an opportunity to get into kind of how to attack a difficult shot like this, because the track obviously is good, and the problem is our foreground breakdancer. So the attempt was made to start kind of removing him, and what I'm noticing is that the easy stuff wasn't done first. So actually working on mocha-ing out the moving arms is kind of the hard part. The easy part, to show you this, I'm just going to duplicate our guy, make sure we get rid of everything that's on him. I'll even take out mocha because we don't need it. Okay, there's a fresh layer. So what I'm going to do is open up the layer and attack this with some roto brush, because it looks to me like other than his arms, we could just nail this that way. And actually, let me extend this out. Now, actually, I didn't need to do that, though, did I? Because what the student did do was isolate the parts where he's actually blocking the logo. So that's good. So let's go to the middle of that and just kind of select this. And I don't know if that's the right starting point. And we're getting a warning. So this is where little things can kill you. So I'll undo that. And let's just take a look. The warning was about frame rates. And this source footage was 23.976, that annoying frame rate. And the student, for whatever reason, probably expediency, just went with 24. You can choose 23.976 right on this menu. You don't even have to choose to type it in every time. And once I do that, I'm not going to get the error anymore. So remember that weird frame rate is only for sound syncs. You think you don't need it, but After Effects actually cares a lot about little things like that. So now, for free, I can see that RotoBrush, even without doing a lot of adjustment, is probably going to do a lot for me on this one. Not going to do everything. Not going to do those arms, but let's take a look at that. Another easy thing to do here would be to take, well, let's see. Let me just work with that same layer again, and I'll solo this one. Take away RotoBrush. And now let's just look at the color channels. So actually I'm going to close this so we can just focus for a moment. Let's look at the color channels. Option 1, 2, 3. So 3 has the best contrast. That's blue. And so we're going to go with keying, not matte. And we're going to go with extract into blue. And we're going to just come down here. Now, what I'm seeing is somewhere in here is some really nice amount of kind of grunge coming through, which I can then bring back and soften. And if I unsolo the layer, that's going to play over my logo. So now I'm getting the arms a bit more for free. And I'm not perfecting this, don't worry. But you can see where I could go with this overall. Maybe. That's kind of a problem right there. But this again gets me closer to what I might want. So now I'm dealing with matte lines and things, but my main point here is that things like RotoBrush or crude tools often work in a case like this, because for the most part, we are matting the layer over itself, and it's only this element that we have to worry about. And so now we only have to worry about that element in very specific places. We can just attack those. I haven't really refined this at all. So you can see where some of the other tools that we've brought to bear here could get you there. So I encourage you, rather than, in some cases, rather than starting with the hardest thing, go for what's easy. Now, both of these approaches, the RotoBrush or this approach, would then be aided by going in with mocha and doing that painstaking work where the contrast isn't good enough to get a procedural matte. Finally, some of the mistakes that I saw made were just a question of breaking down the shots in a, I want to say, logical way, a procedural way, or just kind of looking at the intention. So that's all a roundabout way of saying, here we have this logo that's popping, and the issue is that these are literally two separate shots. In the edit, one was timed to 25%, and then the other to 100%. Now, what you'd want to do in After Effects would be to make that one shot, work on that with Mocha in its native frame rate, and then go ahead and either split it up into two there or use time remapping to give it the two different speeds, because often the editors are only doing it this way just because they don't have anything more elegant. So you could do more of a proper ramp. In any case, I think that some of the frustrations people had really boiled down to just not taking a step back and looking at a specific problem and solving that. And what I haven't done in this review is gone directly into Mocha, but I think this is a student who expressed some frustration initially with the Mocha part, but in fact the tracks overall are pretty good, and the student took advantage of, for example, here moving the logo over there so as to not have to deal with rotoing the kid fully. And some of the choices I would question, like making it so faint here. But I think the tracks are sticking pretty well. And so there are these technical difficulties that I want to make sure you guys avoid that will ruin the result.